Foundation board co-chair. My co-chair is Cassie Johnson, and she is here with us also. We had a lot of people who were interested in getting information about how to fill out our grant application. And so we asked Katie Kitchen and Jessica Fuller from the Greater Salina Community Foundation to put this presentation together. They are our parent organization, and they have a full-time staff that meet all of our organizational needs, and we are really thankful for them. We put this workshop together intentionally during our grant window. Our grant window is open right now. It is open until October the 15th. So hopefully you'll get some tips and hints and tricks as Katie and Jessica go through this today. We are also trying to grow knowledge, sort of public relations with the Smoky Valley Community Foundation. We do a lot of amazing things around here, and we are trying to grow our enhancement fund. So be on the lookout for more information. We're going to do different things throughout the year that will hopefully get our name out there and also provide a service like this to our community. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Katie Kitchen and Jessica Fuller from the Greater Salina Community Foundation.
Thanks, Jeannie, so much for that. I'm so glad y'all could join us today for this workshop. We will try to hit some just general best practices for grant writing, and then we're also going to dig specifically into the Smoky Valley Community Foundation application. Just to say a little bit about myself, I'm the Director of Regional Affiliates for the Greater Salina Community Foundation, and I've worked for the Community Foundation for 7 years, and through that role have done everything from the marketing to reviewing grants to administering, helping with the administration of our affiliate program. So lots of different things and experiences, and I hope what I can bring tonight is valuable. Jessica?
Hey everybody, I'm Jessica Fuller, and I've been with the foundation for about 2.5 years now. My role is the Grants and Scholarship Coordinator, so I help specifically with the grants that come through for Smoky Valley, and I also help with the scholarships that they hold also.
Okay, so we're gonna just dive right into our presentation today. We are going to cover kind of 4 main areas. Why is your status important? Research, grant criteria, and planning, because we think the planning is the most important part of a grant application. Then just specifics about grant applications and writing tips that we have, and then just some closing info and review. And like I said, we will have time for questions at the end. And if you want to type in the chat to share or ask any questions live, we'll try to get to those as we see them. Okay, so why is your status important? This is not for your social media or anything else. This is actually your IRS tax status. And not all charities are created equal, unfortunately, and your status is really important. You can be a nonprofit, but you aren't necessarily a 501c3 nonprofit. And for many funders across the country, they require you to be a 501c3 nonprofit. Things like Chamber of Commerce, Lions Club, American Legions, VFWs are actually not 501c3s. They're a 501c, but they may be a 6 or a 13 or a 19. And so those designations, the IRS has said, while you're a nonprofit, you are not a charitably deductible nonprofit. And so it's important to know what your status is, because you may waste a lot of your time applying for a grant that you actually don't qualify for. Fortunately, the Smoky Valley Community Foundation, our network, we know a lot of good work happens from groups that may not be 501c3s. So we do allow grants from other entities, but we have a higher level of diligence that we have to do in order to make sure that the request that's being asked is charitable. So with that, how do you know your status? Well, you can be a 501c3, like I explained, and you should have a determination letter somewhere in a file somewhere from the IRS, not the state of Kansas, but the IRS, saying what you are. If you can't find it, it got lost somewhere, you can always request a new letter, and they will send that to you. Now, as any other thing with the federal government, sometimes that's slow and sometimes that's fast. But it's important to have that letter on file somewhere. Also, if you're a church, a school, or government, by your nature, you are serving the public good, and the IRS deems you the same as a 501c3. And so with any of those 4 areas, you would qualify. Now, some funders may say we're not going to help government, and so you may be out, but for the most part, if you're one of those 4, you've got the magic bullet and can apply to a lot of different funders. So if you're not a public charity, it's okay, like I said, for us. But you must have a federal tax ID number. Every business has a federal tax ID number, whether you're a nonprofit or for-profit. So you have an EIN somewhere, and in order to apply to the community foundation, we require that, whether you are a 501c or not. So it's important to have that number. What happens if you don't have an EIN? You need to get one. So your entity can open a checking account, and in that, they assign you a tax ID number. So there are some things that you can do to do that. If your organization is already in our system and you want to apply, just give us a call here at the office. This will come into play that it's important that you're not working on your application on the very last day it's due, because you may not get a hold of someone at the office. But we kind of control who's applying, and so you have to actually call if it says your tax ID number is already in our system. And honestly, a lot of funders work a very similar way. So you're going to hear a lot, work ahead. Don't wait till the last minute, and this is one of those great reasons why. Okay, so research, grant criteria, and planning. So it's now that we've determined we're a 501c3, so now we can apply, or we're applying to Smoky Valley Community Foundation, but my project's charitable, and so I know I can apply even if I'm not a C3. So now the very next important step is to research and really understand what the funder is trying to do. So there are ways that you can find funders. GuideStar, Foundation Center, and many other resources for grants. Unfortunately, GuideStar used to be a free service. You just sign up for a free account, and now they've kind of cut that, where you can still get on and find C3s, but you can't actually get to their 990, which shows all their grant history and different great things. So most of these are paid, but there's also creative ways that you can find out what funders like the Community Foundation do. One, most funders that are like in the Community Foundation standpoint have an annual report that reports what they fund. So that's one place that you can look. The other thing is, as a charity, we are required to share our 990, and ours is on our website. So that's another place that you could go and actually research why that comes to play. And also what a funder is just talking about on their website, or press releases that come out, any history that you can find. What are they talking about, or what have they funded, is a good signal of what they like to do. And that just helps you understand that if you're applying for a park project, improvement project, for instance, and this funder has never supported a park improvement ever, it doesn't mean they won't. but maybe this isn't maybe the right funder for you, because honestly, park projects, the reason I picked that, that's a popular thing people do in communities and apply for. And so that is a signal that maybe that's not something they like to do. But if you're applying to a funder for a park project and see over the last few years, they've done all kinds of community development projects or beautifications, and parks are on the list, that's a good signal that, hey, I'm actually on the right track with this funder. So on grant criteria, so that was all before we've even looked at the grant criteria. This is just looking at the organization, the funder itself. On grant criteria, that is actually the specific information that explains what the requirements are for that funder or for that grant. Where does that come from? Almost always that it comes from a donor. Someone left money during their lifetime or after their death saying, I want this money to do these things. And so as the organization that oversees that money, it's our obligation to follow that donor's intent. So it gives us a purpose. Okay, now sometimes the funder may put additional requirements on that. So it's important to read through everything. It absolutely displays what we want to buy. If we say we want to pay for parks, then we're going to pay for parks. But we're probably not going to put a city street down if we say we're paying for parks. So it's important to read that criteria really clearly to understand, because some of that is there to really tell you exactly what we're wanting to do and what we can't do. We are limited to that grant criteria because donors who have left us a gift for, let's say, the arts, are going to be way less likely to give us money if we start using their arts money to pay for sports projects in our community. And so it's really important as the funder that we're following what that donor's intended for that gift. Review all criteria before starting an application, and that is just to make sure that just because you meet one criteria doesn't mean that you fit all. And so, you know, we have a criteria in some of our other communities that say that it will do community beautification and health and public safety, but what they say they won't do is operational support. So if you are an arts entity but asking to pay for your operations, unfortunately, we can't use that funding because there's kind of two tiers to that criteria. Okay, from there, I will hand over to Jessica to go over specifically some things about Smoky Valley Community Foundation.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Okay, so now we're gonna, again, look specifically at Smoky Valley. And Smoky Valley has multiple funds that were set up by the donors that Katie was just talking about. And each fund has its own grant criteria. And that criteria is what the evaluators have to follow when looking at approving or denying grants. Now, please note that you only have to fill out one application to be considered for all three funds. So the three funds that Smoky Valley have is the Heritage Fund, and this is to enhance, strengthen, and promote the heritage of the Smoky Valley area. They have the Enhancement Fund. This is to address present and future needs of the Smoky Valley area. This is the least restrictive fund that they have. And then last but not least is the Healthy Living Fund. And this is to protect and about the protection and promotion of health and well-being of residents. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper about the Healthy Living Fund. This is a fund we get a lot of questions about, so I just wanted to spend some extra time. The Healthy Living Fund is specifically towards healthy lifestyles, behaviors, and environments. And so it is, the intent of this fund is to encourage healthy lifestyles and environments. An example of that is the Sprout House Learning Center. They applied for a grant for a garden, and so this garden helps encourage healthy lifestyles because it was teaching the children about the benefits of eating your fruits and vegetables, and also taught them how to garden. So that's pretty cool. It's also there to help support preventative measures An example of this would be the Marquette Learning Center. They applied for an AED, and so that would fit the health fund. And then last but not least, it's also the intent is to help increase health awareness through education. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the ASSIST or the Youth Mental Health First Aid classes. That's brought on by the Bethany Lutheran Church. But those those grant applications fit the Healthy Living Fund because it is used to bring health awareness through education. So just by giving some examples, maybe it kind of helps you see outside of the box of what Healthy Living Fund grants could reach. Next slide. Okay, so after looking at the funds that Smoky Valley have, this is when you need to stop, look at your grant application. Does your project fit any of those 3 funds? If it doesn't, then stop. This is not the grant application for you, okay? But if it does, then we can proceed. Okay, so when we're looking at a grant and you're thinking, okay, I have this great project, I want to apply, first I want you to consider these things. First, look at collaborations and partnerships. Who can you reach out to the community to help bring this plan to fruition? The budget, what's the purpose of your grant? How is it going to benefit the community? How are you going to measure these results? And how are you going to evaluate if this project was successful or not? And then you need to have a plan. So what are the details? Sometimes we kind of go, hey, I have this great idea. Let's go for the grant application. And then we'll figure out everything after that once we got the money. No, we want the details ahead of time. So this goes back to what Katie was saying. We don't want last minute applications. We need to take the time and plan ahead. So this is where you're going to lay out your who, what, when, where, and how. Okay. Kind of a big tip is interview individuals involved. Okay. So for example, let's say we're putting in a playground. Well, for me, I loved swings. That was my favorite thing to do on a playground, okay? But nowadays, children might not find swings as cool as it was back then. So you want to interview the children that might be involved, and maybe they like zip lines or something. They have really fancy playgrounds now, so we don't know. You want to interview the parents. Maybe to them, the most important thing is having a shade covering for them to sit while they watch their kids. You want to maybe interview the neighbors around. When Olivia's playground was put in here in Salina, they interviewed the neighborhood, and one thing that their concern was the lighting at nighttime and how that was going to come into the house. So that's something for me, if I'm planning, I don't even think about the effects of what that would have. So you want to interview the individuals involved so that you can see all aspects and make this application even greater. Again, become closely familiar with the criteria. Always have that in the back of your mind. And then understand the funder's goals and align, which is saying know the mission of the organization that you're applying for. And that will help you by knowing their mission and what their goal is, will help you write an application to help align with that goal.
And I will add something to this. Jessica's very nice, and so I wasn't sure she would share, but today she was reviewing applications for another one of our affiliate foundations who turned in, the community turned in like 15 applications on the very last day. And some of those applications were one-word answers to our questions, and it really doesn't, and when you're asking for $7,500 and then you've provided me 100 words to describe your project, that's really hard for anyone to rationalize funding you because you don't seem to have a really great plan. And when you're working on something last minute, those kinds of answers are usually what come. So once again, I'm going to reiterate, work ahead, turn in early, because it actually, you will be far beyond a lot of applications that any funder sees, as well as Smoky Valley. Okay.
Nope, you're good, thank you. And also by turning it in ahead, I review those. So if there's something that doesn't make sense or you messed up on the budget, I'll give you a call and say, hey, can you clarify this? Your budget needs to be fixed, so that when it goes to the evaluators, we're giving them the best product for your project. Okay, so now we're going to go into some grant writing tips, and then I'm going to go spotlight some things from our grant application. So, so let's start with grant writing tips. First things first, we want to target a specific project. And when we say that, we want to have a clear ask. This will help the evaluators understand what are they investing in. So if you have too many layers in your ask, if it's going to cause confusion on what you're really asking to be funding. So for example, if I'm going to do this playground and we're going to start off, okay, in this one grant application, you said, well, we're going to do groundwork, we have the equipment, then we got the shade structures. When a evaluator is reading that, they're going to go, okay, but where's my money going to? They have no idea. So you want to prioritize your ask. And so maybe you might need to break your project up into phases. So phase 1 is groundwork. So when the evaluator is reading it, they go, okay, if we fund this, I know exactly where our money's going. It's going to go to the groundwork of this of the playground. Next, you wanted to clearly describe the need. You know how important your project is, and you know how your project is going to impact the community. But the evaluator may not understand or see the need as you do. So as you write your grant application, you want to write it and so that you get the evaluator seeing the project from your eyes. They can feel your excitement. They can see how by doing this, we're going to make an impact into our students. We're going to make an impact into our community. And also think of the ripple effects. The playground, yes, it's going to provide a great place for kids to go to during the day, but also it's going to bring maybe daycares can come in. Outside community members will want to bring their kids to the playground, which will then maybe they'll stay and eat dinner. So those are the ripple effects that you want to think about. And you want to have a clear, detailed budget, and I'm going to go more about that. And then again, I can't reiterate this enough, review all criteria. As you're planning your project, you might have shift the intent or shift what your project is going to be, which may then make your project no longer fit the criteria. So always have that maybe on a sheet of paper by you all the time, so you always have it on the top of your head. Okay. So now I want to jump in and specifically highlight a couple of things from our grant application that usually we have the most questions with. So first, we have SMART goals. And what SMART goals, reason why I put that in there is we feel like it's a great way for you to outline your project, another way for an evaluators to understand. So SMART goals is an acronym. As you can see, it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So I'm going to go through each of those and then we'll have an example. Specific. So in this, you're going to say specifically, what do you want to accomplish? This is where you kind of have the mission statement of your project. Next up is measurable. How are you going to determine if you've met your goal? Now, you cannot count in there. Smiles is not something. Okay, that's measurable. We get that. Don't put down you're going to see all those beautiful smiles. No high fives, okay? Those are qualitative. I want something quantitative. We want measurable data, measurable numbers that you can be done with your project and say, hey, this is how many we have in attendance. Something like that. And then A is for achievable. How are you going to complete your goal? Do you have the tools? Do you need to collaborate with other organizations to meet the mission of your project? And then relevant. How does this fit in with the mission of the organization, the need of the community? And then we have time bound. What is the timing of your project? What's the timeline? Is it realistic? If you have a really large project, you might have to do a timeline for each goal of your project. You might have to break that down. I'm also want to give you this resource. It's smartsheets.com. It's something I found, and it has a really cool worksheet that will help you break down your project, and so you can kind of fill that out, and then it'll make filling our portion of the grant application a lot easier. But there's something to check out. It does a great job of even going into more detail of each of those parts. Okay, I'm ready. So here's an example. Let's scroll up just a little bit here. here's an example of an application that we got. Now this is with a different organization or community foundation, but it's a pretty big project. It's a Limestone Coalition project. And so I just really like how they broke down their goals. Now they have sub goals. I mean, they kind of went all out with their goals, a little extra, but you don't have to have 3 listed. You can just have 1 for each part of our application. But you can see by reading this, the evaluator specifically know, okay, what are they wanting to do and how they plan on achieving. So let's look at their project goal 1. So you could see that the Limestone Coalition is going to collect examples of unusual uses of limestone. Number 2, they're going to look at tourism businesses in the region. And number 3, they're going to accept submissions of people submitting personal property of what's been used. So there's my 3 goals of their project, clearly aligned. So if we scroll down to measurement, it's going to tell you how are they going to keep track to see if this was, if they accomplished this. Well, they have several different ways. 4 and 5 show for when they're collecting the information, they're going to keep a spreadsheet. So you can, something that they can hand out and say, hey, this is what we have done. They're going to use volunteers. They have exact amount of volunteers that's committed to collecting this, of this knowledge, and they're also going to be using a website to help collect. So you can see exactly what they're going to be using for measurement. And then timeline, they break it down beautifully. You see in June, they're going to have all the volunteers chosen. By end of October, they're going to have their map and field guide ready to go to design. And then end of December, they're going to be done collecting tourism information. So an evaluator goes, okay, I see what their 3 goals are, and I see when they want, what's the timeline for that. So it's just really beautifully broken down. Okay. I am ready for the next slide. Awesome. Okay, so next up we have sustainability. This is the question of how do you plan to maintain this project for the years to come? When evaluators are looking at it, they don't always want to be the sole funder of a project. They don't want to go, okay, if I say yes to this project today, does that mean every fall we have to say yes for this project to live on, or every cycle? They don't want that. They want to see that you have skin in the game, and that you are thinking, okay, this is how we believe this in so much. This is what we're going to do to make sure this project lives on for move on. So how do you do that? Is there maintenance? So you can list on how you plan on maintaining the playground equipment, how you plan on maintaining that. Is it going to be built into the organization's budget? Or is someone going to be put in charge of the project and they make sure that it stays on? So those are things you can think about with sustainability. Okay, the budget. This is my #1 question area. So I'm going to show you a good budget and a bad budget. And while I go through the good budget, we're going to hit these bullet points. But real quick, before Katie moves on, I want you to look, and you can write this down. If you are looking with anything with volunteer labor, independentsector.org is a great tool for you to use to help you figure the cost of volunteer labor. So just want to make sure you had a time to write that down before you moved on. Okay. Okay, so here's my example of a good budget. Again, we have the Limestone Coalition. When looking at a budget, we want to look and kind of be like an itemized receipt. So when an evaluator is reading this, they go, okay, I can see exactly where the money's going to go. What are we going to be funding? So you can see here, we have a sightseeing map, we got printing costs, and we got volunteer hours. Okay, so the top parts, we're going to list all of your expenses of your budget. And then the bottom part is where you're going to put your revenue. So you're going to have your total cost of your project, and then we have 4 buckets in which you're going to put your funding for your project in. Okay, so your first budget, oh, I haven't moved around, so my lights just went off in the background. Sorry, they're censored. So here in a secured budget, this is where you're going to put money that you already have, whether this is from budgeting, thank you, whether we have budgeting, You would put that here. If you have any fundraising money that you've received, here they have asked from several different community foundations and they have the approval, and so that's why it's going in secured. The next bucket is the applied for bucket. This is money that you have applied for it, so it's pending, but you don't have an answer if whether you've been approved or not. This is where you're going to put your foundation request. So under, say, community foundation request, and you'll put your amount right there. The earned bucket is your fees, ticket sales, anything you're going to accumulate, and then in kind is one of the most important buckets. The reason being, again, the evaluators like to see that you have skin in the game, that the community and other volunteers believe in your project so much that they're willing to volunteer hours and labor and material to help you get your project going. So that's where you're going to put your volunteer information, in the in-kind bucket. Now, please list your volunteer, your in-kind money in both the expenses and in the revenue, because we want to balance budget. So, and I don't know if you can see it, but you'll see the total project expenses and the total project revenue must equal each other. So there we have a beautiful budget. So let's look at a bad budget. I have to admit, we have the green tea drinkers. They promote, I made this one up. There's no organization, but you know. So this organization is going to promote the benefits of drinking green tea. And all we have is supplies and marketing. When looking at that, the evaluators, they're going, okay, what is the 1,500 doing? They don't know. I mean, supplies, we assume it could be green tea. Is it teacups? Is it a lot of cucumber sandwiches? Like, we have no idea what this $1,000 is going to be. What's the marketing? Is it flyers? Are they doing newspaper ads? Are they walking up and down the streets telling people about it? We don't know what that is. So we want to be specific, because an evaluator is much less likely to want to say yes to your grant application if they don't know exactly where their money's going. But I do want to give props. They balanced their budget, so they did put the community foundation request in there. So okay, so now we have gone and talked about 3 specific areas on a grant application. But next, I want to kind of scroll through what an application would look like. Now, please note, all applications through the Smoky Valley Community Foundation is done online. We do not accept paper applications. You will go online and through our grant portal, create an account, and then you will fill everything out on your computer. But here's just an example of what questions you're going to have. The amount requested on here for Smoky Valley Community Foundation, grant requests cannot exceed $3,000. So when you're looking at your project, please keep in mind that you cannot ask over $3,000. And the next part I want to look at is the project summary, and then we have the project description. The project summary is a brief summary of your grant request, okay? It's just to get the evaluator in the right mindset. They're going, okay, we are going to be reading about a playground project. So just kind of gets them in the mindset. But where the project description is where you're going to be describing your project in detail. This is where you're going to give your who, what, when, where, and why a little bit more detail right here. And then if you want to do the definition of need, this is a very important box, and I know I've mentioned this quite, several times, but this is where you're going to put why is this, what the need of the project is, and most importantly, how did you determine this is what the need was in your community, and why does this need to be taken, project need to be done right now and not maybe in the spring, okay? So next, I want to go to the project start date. We're not going to hit every single one, but the project start date, oh, there we go. When writing your project, the start date cannot happen before grants are awarded. We cannot fund debt, okay? So if your project has already started, the portion that you're asking about has already started, we cannot, that application will not be able to go to the evaluators because of our policy not being able to fund debt. And then we have our project completion date. So that's where your SMART goals and your timeline comes into effect. You'll put your project completion date there. And then we're going to scroll down to our fund options. So remember, Smoky Valley has 3 funds. And we have the Heritage Fund listed and the Healthy Living Fund listed. If you feel like your project fits one of those buckets or both, then you will mark yes to this, and then you have a chance to say why. And we put this in here so that maybe there's an aspect of your project that fits the Health Foundation Fund that we didn't think about. So it kind of gives you a chance to argue why you feel like you fit this fund. Okay, so the next portion is the project financial information, and we're gonna be looking, okay, right there's perfect, thank you. So here we have the minimum request. So a lot of times we receive more grant applications than what's funding's available. So this is where you get to let us know if you are able to accept less than what your requested amount was. If you are, then you'd hit yes, I will accept any amount. And that gives the evaluators the most flexibility in funding your project. They can kind of choose how much they want to give to it. If you're willing to accept less, but there's a minimum amount, you would select that choice. And then under minimum request amount, you would list what's the minimum amount that you would accept. So for example, if your project, you're asking for 3,000, but the minimum amount that you can accept is 1,000, you would put 1,000 in the minimum request amount. Please note what that does is that the evaluators can only give you 1,000 to 3,000. They can't give you anything less than the minimum you put in there. So it's a little bit more restrictive on what the evaluators can do. If you cannot accept a reduced amount, then you would hit no, and they can only give you 3,000. If they don't have it available, then you might not get the grant. Now, on the yes, you would fill that out if yes, but there's a minimum amount required to receive. If your project truly cannot move past step 1 unless you have this money in there, then yes, please fill that out. That's when you would put a minimum, that you have to have that amount before your project can go on. That budget sheet that we showed with the good and bad budgets, we do provide that. You have to use that budget sheet, and it's embedded in our application. And what you're just going to do is click on it, upload the document, fill it out, and then upload it to your application. So it's provided there. And last but not least is date when funds are needed. Something to make note of is that grants are awarded approximately 4 to 6 weeks after the application deadline, not when you submit it, but when the application. So Jeannie already said your application deadline is October 15th. So grants are not awarded till 4 to 6 weeks after that. So when you're looking at your timeline and planning your project, keep that in mind, and that's when you would list when the funds were needed. Back to you, Katie.
Okay, great. Okay, so just to kind of close out some other general things and tips that can help you with an application is, 1, use the funder's language. And what we mean by that is that what Jessica said earlier of like understanding what the mission of the funder is, if you can incorporate their language into your application to say, hey, you think giving kids a place to play is important, and that's why our park project is something that fits what you're trying to do. That is only helping convince those evaluators to give you money. And so using their language as much as you can be really helpful and creates subconsciously or consciously a connection for those evaluators. Also, big tip that most don't do, read your application before you submit it. I mean, out loud to yourself, because actually you will catch a lot of grammatical mistakes. And I can't tell you how many times I've had people go, this is a good project, I guess, but man, they just were crappy writers. Do you really want that to be the reason they decide to fund you or not? I mean, that's just such an easy thing to do. Then after you've read it and you think it sounds pretty awesome, have someone else read the application. And my advice with this would be have someone read it that has no connection or understanding with your project at all. Because if they can read it, understand it, and not ask you any follow-up questions, it means that you've written an application that the evaluators are going to understand. And like my mother writes grants, and I don't know, I mean, I know what she does for a living, but I don't know the project she does. She has me read her stuff a lot of times, and as soon as I ask her a question, she's like, you're right, I made an assumption there. And she's back in writing more down, because ultimately when we're so close to a project, then we kind of make some assumptions in our mind and don't realize we haven't brought the reader along with us. So it's a really great thing to have someone else read your application. And that goes into why it's important to submit early, or be ready early, because you have time then to have that extra time to have someone else have a couple days to read your application. Eliminate acronyms and jargon. I will tell you, teachers and medical professionals are the two worst groups on crazy acronyms, things that I'm an educated person and have no idea what they're talking about. So please avoid that. If you have a really long title, like I work for the Greater Salina Community Foundation, and I really don't want to have to write that over and over again. It's fine, but the first time it appears, write the whole thing out, and then in parentheses, put your little acronym. But you don't want to do that for like 10 different acronyms in your thing. Pick one or maybe two, and that's it. Otherwise, you need to spell everything else out. Finally, one of the most important things you can do is tell the story from your heart, whether that's touching, whether that's tongue-in-cheek and a little bit funny, it doesn't matter, but it is trying to get people to remember you. If evaluators have to review 20 applications, the worst thing that can happen is it gets to yours in the list and they go, so can someone remind me what that was again? You don't want that to happen, because nobody felt anything while they were reading. And ultimately, humans are emotional beings, and pulling on those emotions will be awesome. Just a couple really fun examples of that. Well, fun and not fun, but one was a beautiful application around something that was really boring. Chairs and tables for a senior center. Super boring. Like, honestly, like that doesn't make me feel all fun and juju, but the applicant wrote it in a way that talked about how much of a difference it would make in their ability to serve their senior population. They relied on the seniors as volunteers for setup and tear down. It was going to help in the sustainability of their organization, because now with tables and chairs that were attractive, that they were going to start offering their space on times that seniors weren't using it as at a small rental fee for the community at large, so that they could sustain their space for the long term. So we're actually solving a mouth to feed in the community. So it was, and instead of saying, well, we'll know it's great because people are smiling, she talked about how much increased usage that she anticipated with this. She also talked about how much increased volunteerism, because instead of tables that weighed 25 to 40 pounds on average each, that they weighed less than 10. And some things like that made it awesome thing that I understood what was happening and I felt something about it. So something that also wasn't necessarily an exciting thing, but the applicant wrote it from the perspective of an angry farmer wanting to keep the raccoons out of his garden. They had a community garden, and every time they planted corn, the raccoons got it. And so it was this very much, I mean, okay, so this application was like early in my career here, and I still remember the title was Save the Corn, Raccoons Not Wanted, was the title of the application. And then the whole thing was this tongue-in-cheek battle between the farmer and raccoons. And all we were buying was solar-powered electrical fencing to go around the cornfield. But man, did I remember it because of the story he told. So just keep that in mind when you're writing. It doesn't have, not everybody's a comedian. I try to be funny, and I'm really not a funny person. So I could never write an application like that. But I'm really good at telling a heartfelt story about why I'm passionate about something. So I'm going to rely on that skill set for myself. So just think about who you are, what your project is, and how you can tell people really why it's so important and needed. Okay, so wah wah, there's never enough funding for everything. Honestly, it's just not, it doesn't matter how much money a funder has, there's never enough, ever. And so you may have written an amazing application and it just sometimes doesn't work out this time. But don't feel discouraged. It doesn't mean it's no forever. Try again. I always say to people, try once, try a second time. If the second time's a no-go, that's probably your signal they're not interested. But sometimes just the first time, you just could have an unlucky circumstance. I just was talking to a grantee today that said, I'm just really surprised because we wrote an amazing application. This is something I felt like was right up the alley. And I said, there were 25 applications and it was really competitive this time. That's it. That, it just, that sometimes happens. And so, but don't give up. Sometimes funders will say too, if there are areas to improve, I would ask that question. Not all funders share that of what you could do differently, but some will. It's always worth asking. The worst you're going to say is we don't share that information. Okay, so just other info and just some review now to kind of go through some things. As Jessica mentioned earlier, our applications are online. You can find this at the Smoky Valley cf.org. There's two different places that apply for a grant where the big red arrow is, or on the top menu, there's a grants, and that's how I got to this page. And then there's apply for the grant on the side. There's lots of great information about frequently asked questions, and if you were awarded a grant, a way to publicize, because the best thing you can do if you're awarded is to thank the funder by saying, thank you, funder, in a press release or some sort of community thing. So if the community foundation gives you a grant, by putting out to your donors, to your groups, whatever, saying, this project was made possible in part or fully because of the Smoky Valley Community Foundation. That just really helps the funder feel like they got to be a part, and ultimately that helps the funder hopefully get more gifts, which means they can help you more in the future. Grant, if you're awarded, you also are required to write a grant report. Tell a good story, because the Smoky Valley Community Foundation publicizes grants on their Facebook page, in their annual report, and some other ways. And if you've told a good story, the likelihood is your nonprofit is going to be advertised to a whole nother group of donors you don't even necessarily have connections to, because we got a really good story from you. And so that's a really easy thing that we can throw on our social media or throw in our annual report, and we're telling your story for you. Don't forget to take photos and submit those. We love those, and those are more likely to get postings in the places mentioned. If you are not 501c3, school, church, or government, those magic 4, keep all your receipts because you are required to submit receipts of all expenditures on any grant that you receive. So once again, if you're not one of those 4, save your receipts. If you are one of those 4, we just want a really good story, some photos. We don't expect any receipts at all. Your grant report is due within 30 days of your project completion. That doesn't mean that we need to chase you down to get your grant report. The system will actually automatically send you a reminder to submit that report. But once you finish your project, the first thing on your list should be, okay, I need to submit that report to the Community Foundation so I can apply in the future. Because if you have an outstanding and overdue grant report, you will not receive future funding from the Community Foundation. And that's all funders, I can tell you, they won't go forward. So, okay, so finally, just to review, if you took nothing else away, just remember these things. Develop an idea by research and planning, review the funders' criteria, create SMART goals, write a thoughtful, clear, creative proposal, and proofread and review before submitting early. Yay! Because, you know, that's only going to mean that Jessica is going to help you even be better. And I heard someone once say that, well, if you submit on the last day, you better hope you wrote the most perfect application because there's no help then from that point on. So really consider, you know, I tell people all the time, okay, so the Smoky Valley's Community Foundation's grants are due October 15th. So put the due date as October 10th on your thing and just work backwards from there. Also, just finally, if you're awarded a grant, don't forget to write a timely report and tell a great story with pictures. That concludes our part of our workshop, and we would be happy to answer any questions. That went way faster. We thought it's the first time we've ever done one together, so we weren't sure on our timing. So we have plenty of time to answer any questions that any of you may have.
Okay, and before people ask questions, I just wanted to reiterate, we specifically asked Katie and Jessica to go over the SMART goals and the budget. And so will these slides be available later for people to see, Katie?
We can absolutely make those available.
Yeah. Because I feel like that's something really important. And then those other resources that you gave us for the SMART goals, and then that other one independent sector, I think would be really helpful. And the other thing that Jessica just touched on at the beginning is the reason that we want to grow our enhancement fund is because that's the biggest source of unrestricted funds that we have to give back to the community. So as we do projects over the course of the next couple of years, and we're trying to grow that fund, we want to be able to give more back to our community. Our project's actually called Plant Our Future, Watch It Grow. And so that enhancement fund is directly impacted by the money that people give and that we're going to be working on. And so I just thought that would be good information for everybody to have.
Awesome. Well, and if anyone has questions specifically about a project they're thinking about, I mean, now's your time to get a remark either from Jessica or myself. And, you know, we threw a lot of information at you, so.
I've got 2 quick questions if you guys are willing. One is, do you prioritize rewards based on when grants are turned in, or are they all reviewed at the same time? And the second one is, yeah, like you mentioned, there's 3 different funds. Would you suggest like giving rationales for all 3 funds or just one fund? Yeah, is one of those better?
For your first question, we do not base reviewing or approvals based on when we get the application. They're all reviewed at the same time. So I wait until after the application date to send those off to evaluators so they get it all in one big group. As far as looking at the different funds. And Katie, maybe you can jump in with your experience here, but I feel like I would, if you have one, I would maybe, if you had one grant application that really fitted one fund, then focus towards that one on your why when you fill out the possible funding options section. Instead of kind of, I don't want you to, an evaluator will see, oh, that's kind of a far stretch to be able to be in a healthy living fund. Like today, I was getting a grant application, it's new flooring, but they're trying to get healthy living to go for that. Well, that's a pretty good stretch. Yes, they can maybe steam it and you know, clean it better that way, but it's not really a healthy living thing.
Yeah, I would agree with Jessica. I think if you think it qualifies, you should fill it out. If it feels like a stretch, don't, because then it just feels like I'm not sure that works. The thing that why it's important to fill that out is because sometimes, you know, our staff, we do not decide who gets grants or how much or anything, but we pay attention to criteria and whether or not it qualifies for the different funding buckets. That is our role. And then making sure what's being asked for is charitable, and we do the due diligence of whether the entity is a C3 or not, those kinds of items. Sometimes I've had a applicant, when I've read that before, and they've said, well, we qualify for the public health fund for these reasons. And as I had read the beginning part of the application, it's like, well, no, this isn't going to qualify for that bucket. I know it might qualify for the enhancement fund, but it's not going to do. And then their rationale say, you know what, they've convinced me. And so it actually gives you two different buckets that the evaluators can use to fund you, which it increases your chances. You know, the more things that you qualify for, or, you know, the public health money, I mean, just to be frank, is the hardest money the evaluators have to give away. There's not a lot of applications that fit that criteria. And so if you think you qualify for the public health fund, give us your rationale in there. And the worst it's going to be is like, well, they said that, but I don't think it really does. You know, the worst it did is took up a little bit of your time. But that funding is something that, yeah, it's just always difficult to grant. So.
Hi, I have a question. We're from the gypsum area, and so we didn't know if, so thank you for letting us get on this. But we didn't know if we qualified, if you guys accepted any applications from the gypsum area, or if we would be outside of your guys' area for the Lindsberg.
So Smoky Valley serves any community served by the school district. So USD, is it 400, right?
400.
Someone correct me.
Okay.
Okay, 400. But at Gypsum, because you're in Saline County, you actually qualify for any grants, the Greater Salina Community Foundation. So
Okay.
I would just go to our website and look at those. I think we just finished a grant cycle just now, but we offer grant cycles, I think 4 or 5 times a year. Brandy's on here. She may jump in 4 times a year. So you would qualify for that. There's lots of different funding options, but it follows the same process, one application, and you're going to see SMART goals on there. I mean, the nice thing is what you heard tonight is very applicable to our application at GSCF, just with some other different funding options. So I would check those out.
Okay, and I just had one more question. On the budget portion of it, so we have a pretty large budget. We're trying to start up a youth program for a summer youth program for Gypsum area. And so our budget's around 23,000. So we're going to be trying to get multiple grants, plus we're continuing to fundraise. So how do we actually show that in the budget to make everything line up? Because we haven't applied for all grants yet. Do we put what grants we intend to apply for and hope to get, or how do we do that?
Do you want to answer that, Jessica, or would you like
you
me
go
to?
ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
She's tossing it at me. Well, I think I would come back to you and say, is this a project done in phases or not?
Okay.
I mean, that's a question.
Well, I mean, we have to have all the funding in order to have it happen. Our goal is to have it happen. The summer of 2021.
Okay.
So our goal is to have all the funds raised by then.
My suggestion would be put your entire budget down, okay? But then you need to be very clear in the application of while our, what'd you say, $25,000?
23.
Okay, well, while our whole project is going to cost $23,000, your part that we're asking you to help us with is this. So, maybe it's the supplies. I'm just going to make something up. And those cost $3,000. So, and the supplies include X, Y, Z. And having that very clear. And then, yes, on the revenue side, if you're applying to other entities, you would just put that in the applied for. If that's your plan, that I'm going to apply for $5,000 from this entity and $500 from this other, you just put that down in that place. Because ultimately, you need it to match, and because it's kind of one big thing, I wouldn't try to just say this one part, because I don't think you're giving the evaluators the whole picture of what the project is.
Okay, perfect.
One thing I could add, if I could, yes, it would land in that pending column as Katie stated on that budget sheet, but there is a question, I think, right after the budget in the application that says, or towards the end, it says, specifically, how will your funds be used? And it's a text box that you get to explain. So it basically ties everything back to what you're trying to accomplish with the dollar amount assigned to it. So say you do have $3,000 worth of supplies, as Katie mentioned as an example, you would say, yes, it says it in my budget as a line item, but I'm going to clearly state my funds will be spent on $3,000 with XYZ, whatever it is. So does that help?
Yep.
It just gives you, the application gives you plenty of opportunity to make very clear what you're trying to do and what you're trying to get the evaluators to buy. I always say your budget and the specific use of funds is the receipt that you're giving the evaluators. They want to know what you're buying. They're buying for their money. And so you want to make sure to be very clear. Now, do they want to know what every nail costs? If you're putting up a pergola in your park? No. But do they want to know the big ticket items of kind of what things are? Yes.
Okay.
Well, and then the other thing I was going to say, just what Katie said about showing the budget, showing the big picture of the whole project is huge. And so I think, I just thought people would like to hear that. And then also just for Steph and Eldon, email me. I'm on the thing that they sent out once you registered. I have someone who I know who might have a resource for you. Okay.
And you also, just for the gypsum people, you're in Saline County, you qualify for grants from the Dane G. Hansen Foundation too. So if they're not on your list, you need to put them on your list. Unfortunately, Lynn's working right over the thing. Sorry, but
No worries.
And what she means by that is not only does Saline County have Hansen dollars, but you can apply to Hansen directly. Two separate grants, the same software. They have monthly application due dates. We have 4 times a year, not quite quarterly. Our next application due date is October 15th. So you have 2 Hansen opportunities, just to make that clear.
any other questions? Okay, well, speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for joining us, and I'll let Jeannie close. Jessica Fuller is definitely your resource going forward if you have a question or things. I'm absolutely happy to help, but she's really in the nitty gritty of doing the work. So she's your best resource if going forward, if you ever have any questions about the application. And Jeannie?
Yeah, again, thank you for being here. We are absolutely happy to share information with people who aren't necessarily in our area. We feel like we're all in this together and we can help each other however we can. And we're just glad you guys came tonight. Again, Jessica is the one is like our person as you're filling out the grant application. But you're also welcome to call me or Cassie. We're happy to help you in any way we can.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, guys.